Mindful teaching helps you because I think there are a lot of people that might have a curriculum or they just teach the thing that they're doing and they recycle it. So they're good at that, but they're not incrementally adding new moves and stuff like that. I think that teaching allows you to improve your understanding of the moves. I think teaching helps you stay current. So I think it's really useful to teach. I think it's one of the greatest gifts that you can give to another human being is imparting wisdom and skills that you have found success with.
Welcome to the Ageless Warrior Lab. I'm BJJ Black Belt and Dirty Dozen member Dave Meyer, here to draw wisdom from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and the martial arts and explore how it applies to success in business, relationships, your long-term health, and making the most out of your life. What you're about to hear is an interview with my good friend, active Black Belt Masters competitor, and man of many talents, David Mitchell. David's well known in the BJJ community for his outrageous submission rate in competition. In the last few years, in hundreds of matches across the IBJJF tournaments, international super fights, ADCC, and more, he's won around 85% of his matches, and the wins were 90% of the time by submission. In 2024, he was ranked the #1 Master 2 no-gi overall competitor by IBJJF, and 2025 ranked #2. Beyond his jiu-jitsu exploits, David has spent 10 years working full-time in the corporate tech space, most of which was at Google in finance planning and analysis, where most recently he optimized the training for Google Finance staff to better use tools and gain knowledge to improve their work output. He recently stepped away from Google, and now he and his business partner are hard at work on their own venture called MMA Fight Advisor, which uses cutting-edge technology to give users the edge in placing their sports bets, currently focused on the UFC. He also just released a jiu-jitsu instructional with BJJ Fanatics called Ankle Locks Don't Work and Other Lies, where he shares key details on his most famous submission, you guessed it, the ankle lock. David teaches seminars and privates all over California, all to share the knowledge that led him to submission victories against world champions and jiu-jitsu legends, including this jiu-jitsu legend, who he makes tap like a white belt every time we train. David and his wife, Lauren Sachs, also a BJJ black belt and champion competitor, have a YouTube channel called Team Chaos Jiu-Jitsu that provides technique breakdowns, competition highlights, and hosts their podcast, Jiu-Jitsu Ponderings, where they provide their expertise in tackling topics like competition mindset and how to learn and improve at Jiu-Jitsu and some of the more lighthearted topics with occasional visits by their many dogs. I'll link to his new instructional in the show notes, and I can't wait for you to join us for a chat with a modern-day Renaissance man, my friend and training partner, David Mitchell. David, thanks for taking the time to speak with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's an honor and a pleasure.
I know you through jiu-jitsu, although we actually work on some other things together too. Tell me just a bit about your entry into martial arts, into grappling. I know you had some high school wrestling experience. Tell me how you got to be where you are today in jiu-jitsu.
The speed version of it is I was doing sports and trying to find what worked for me when I was in middle school-ish. And I would play baseball or basketball or run cross country. And I wasn't any particularly skilled in any of them. I went to baseball seasons in a row where we didn't win a single game, and it was pretty rough. And one of my best friends did wrestling, and he's like, oh, you should try that out. You have a little bit more agency. I don't know if he said it in so many words. So I wrestled in 6th and 8th grade, and it was definitely an avenue for me to put a lot of effort into and see some results from it. It was also therapeutic in the way that I can put my anger and angst as one young child is growing up through a world. And so during high school, I really poured myself into a single sport, which was wrestling, and even in the off season doing Olympic style. So the freestyle and Greco-Roman that you would see in the Olympics. So I would do that as well. And I spent a lot of time competing. And then I did a little bit in college, but I straight away wasn't doing very much for a while, got into roller hockey and then ice hockey. And there's about a 7-year gap between doing anything and starting to get a little bit back into athletics. And I moved back after I graduated from college to San Jose in California. And I was trying to find something to get back in. I felt like I had unfinished business in the wrestling realm, although it's really difficult to do wrestling outside of high school and college.
Right.
Then you're either going for the world team and Olympics, or there's kind of bad MMA gym type stuff going on. So I went to AKA Sunnyvale, and I was helping out with the wrestling program because they had a small wrestling program. I started helping out with coaching. And then the wrestling coach there was like, oh, you should try jiu-jitsu. And I was like, okay, I can have like a consistent workout. Maybe it'll help my wrestling a little bit. So I put on the pajamas about 12 and a half years ago, and it kind of made a lot of sense. Even in the gi, there's a lot of differences. You have to unlearn a couple things, but about 12 and a half years ago at AKA Sunnyvale, I started my journey. And I think a month and a half into training, I started competing right away. I was just one of my ethoses. I just like competing. And then I quickly progressed through the belt rankings, and here I am today. That's the shortened version.
And I just got to say, for our listeners who don't get the joke, when you said you put on pajamas, that's a wrestler talking who's not used to having any material hanging off him, putting on the Japanese judo gi or the jiu-jitsu gi, and suddenly people can grab your collars and grab your sleeves and grab your pant legs. And it does feel like you're kind of swimming in these pajamas.
A different experience for sure. But I feel like whether it's a gi or no gi, you obviously have to learn and get used to it and unlearn a couple things from wrestling habits. But it made more sense to me, and I liked it more than I ever liked wrestling. And I did love wrestling. I was really into it. Or I did it a lot. I was obsessed with it. I don't know. I often would say it's not about enjoying yourself. It's about the grind and the perseverance through it. But it was definitely something that felt like it clicked, and it felt like I was at home once I found jiu-jitsu.
So I was recently talking to Ricky Rocket in a episode that'll either be released just before this or just after this. And we did talk a little bit about gi versus no gi, whether to wear the uniform or not. And it's the same sport, but there's differences. And I think more you can do with the gi because there's more opportunities to grab, more chokes, more things like that. It tends to slow you down because you can slow somebody down. You can kind of get held with the gi and friction and all that kind of stuff. You have been successful as a competitor in both formats. Do you have a preference for the format and for why? And I'll just say for our non-jiu-jitsu listeners, I think that this is an interesting thing because when you are wearing the gi, you have maybe a more complex fight. So it really can be a question, do you want less complexity or more complexity? Could be one way to look at this. I'm curious to hear how you look at it. And I think that has applications in life in general. When there's more complexity, it can be more interesting. Like John Will says, what gets you into this sport is not what keeps you in the sport 30 years later. So I think having a gi is more likely to keep you in the sport 30 years later because there's just an infinite amount of ways to grab and things. So I think sometimes complexity in life is what drives interest, which is good. But anyway, that's my long way of saying, what do you prefer and just what do you think are the differences?
It's the age-old question. I think that I prefer, gun to my head, if I had to choose one versus the other, I prefer no-gi. I have a little bit more success in that. Some of it's the competitor pool is a little bit less deep, but it's also, I think, comparatively, my no-gi game is a little bit better. But I like wherever there's battles. Super fight organizations come around. They're like, hey, you want a match? And I'm like, yeah, let's do no-gi. They're like, we got gi. I'm like, all right, let's do that. So I'm fine with either. The IBJJF has tournaments on Saturday, then Sunday, one's gi, and the other's no gi. I'll just go wherever I can get matches. I'm ready for war. I do slightly prefer no-gi, and I will challenge your assertion that no-gi is less complex. I do agree that the permutation possibilities just explode with the gi because, holding a lapel here and there. But I also think in a lot of ways it kind of focuses what can and can't happen. It slows things down, like you're saying. It can be very highly technical, but it could also get bogged down a lot too. And where no-gi, I think there is a little bit more simplistic interaction sometimes. And I also think it's the variance of matches is interesting because if you're really, really good at no-gi, and you have someone that's just really good at no gi, that second person has a lot higher percentage chance of winning that match because things can get caught and that kind of stuff. And also just from like a spectator perspective, it's just a lot easier to follow along and everything. But both of them are beautiful sports. I think that the complexity and the nuances when it comes to no-gi become the minutia details matter a lot more. And it's really fun. And it's a big puzzle that's ever changing. And being able to transfer moves to different body types is a lot harder than in the gi, because I think there's certain moves in the gi. If you grab their lapel, it's kind of like you grab the lapel regardless. But if you go against someone your own size or bigger, how you're doing certain moves in no-gi have to change pretty dramatically given the size differential or body types and stuff. But long story short, I think both of them are beautiful. Both of them have a lot of validity. And I think you should train both of them if that's at all possible to you. Because I think that if you're looking for a holistic approach, you'll expose aspects of the sport that you might not get to be able to see or uncover because you can stay within certain bounds. I think also in the gi, it's easier to be what we call a toad, which is you have a game and you just do that game no matter what. And if you win, you win. If you don't, you don't. And I feel like it's easier to not continue to expand and build on your game because there's some things that you can do to really slow down the other opponent. So that's just my 2 cents.
So first of all, you said, I had said I thought gi was more complex, and you said you wanted to push back on that. And at that moment, I was about to end the interview because it would be my one chance to make you tap out instead of you making me tap out. But I'm glad I didn't, because you make a really good point. You made a lot of really good points. But certainly, while there are a lot of possibilities of grips and chokes and things like that that you get when you have this pajamas, as you said, hanging off of you, speed is its own element of complexity. And you're very right that when you can't slow things down as easily, when you can't stall as easily because you can't grip and hunker down as easily, that is, I guess you could call that a multiplier against everything else, because now timing becomes much more important, and therefore nuance becomes much more important, especially when you're talking about catching a foot or something like that, or a heel. So I've not thought about it that way, but I think you're right. That's very interesting. It's funny to me how people tend to generalize. This is just, I think, the way our brains work. And I know you've thought a lot about how our brains work. So people will say things like, exactly like what I just said, like, people generalize. That is a generalization, right? What people are we talking about? Are we talking about indigenous people in Madagascar? Are we talking about white men in California? I mean, there's lots of different people who do lots of different things. So it's understandable that we do that, though. So one of those generalizations, I think, is gi versus no gi, because gi itself could be a lot of things. Look, there's sambo where you're wearing a top and you're wearing shorts. Judo gis are long and floppy. Jiu-jitsu gis are more tapered, right? So there's different flavors of how you play this, and it's entirely possible to be wearing a gi and in a gi class and don't grab anyone's gi, right? Which is, again, a little bit of a different game, because it's not exactly the same as no gi, because you still have friction and you still have people grabbing you, but you're not grabbing them. So there's like half permutations of all these kinds of different things that I think are fun. And I think that goes to what you're saying. It's all beautiful. It's all interesting. It's all intricate, right? I would say I like gi better because in my mind, I like the opportunities to grip. And maybe it's because I am older. Mostly, I do want to slow people down. That's exactly what I want to do. And also, I think to your point that you made, which I absolutely agree with, that a good person against a not as good person still might have a more competitive match in no gi. In my way of thinking, the person who wants to control wants friction. The person who wants to escape needs slipperiness. I don't care if you're talking about getting out from the bottom. I don't care if you're talking about escaping a choke, escaping whatever. And the gi, by the nature of having this cloth, creates friction. So if you are the better guy, in general, not talking about what you're good at or whatever, but just in general, you're going to be even more better if you have friction, because that betterness is going to show up everywhere. If you are the lesser person, being slippery is going to allow you to maybe escape the first few attacks of the better guy. and maybe you're in better shape than the better guy, and now the better guy's gas tank is going down, and you're going, so I think it
Mhm.
makes for a more both exciting and more movement-filled match, but you also can't predict. So, I am often the better guy in my training, except when I'm against you and against some of the other black belts at Black Sheep. So, generally speaking, having a gi allows me to slow people down, crush them, and do my game. But interestingly, most of my world championship medals are all no gi, and I attribute that to, for one, I had years and years of no-gi training out of El Nino and Fairtex with, Gil and people there, so there's just that. But also, I'm not a professional martial arts instructor, and so what happens for me is the techniques that remain in my repertoire are the ones that I am practicing every day because 'cause I'm not teaching
Mhm.
anybody everything. But the guys I train against, almost all are instructors. So they have in their repertoire their techniques they like, but they're also every day reviewing every technique because they're teaching. And so what I find happens is if I haven't been practicing with the gi for months before like a gi competition, I might get caught in something, or I might face something that I have not seen in 6 years because no
Mhm.
one has done it to me and because I haven't had to teach it to anybody. So I feel that actually puts me at a little bit of a disadvantage. I think one of the advantages of teaching is you stay current on the whole panoply of things that can go on in jiu-jitsu and not just the things that you do when you train, right?
Yep.
So, curious if you have any reactions on that, and also that's a good segue into the a good reason for teaching, and I know that you're an excellent teacher, and what do you think the benefits of teaching are? So I'll shut up.
So I'll answer that. It's a multiple part question, but
Right.
I love the preface, but also the question itself. I think that teaching is an incredible tool to get better at jujitsu.
Or anything.
Not even or anything.
Right.
Yes, I mean it's if you can teach something in a digestible manner to someone, you have near mastery of it, or at least a pretty good understanding. And oftentimes you'll iron out inefficiencies, whether you're talking about a process that you're going to be delegating to a new hire in a financial process and you're talking it through to that person, you'll often see, oh, this step is not really that necessary, or oh, I can automate that component of it and I can pass it along. Or in jujitsu, you realize whether while you're talking through it or the questions that are being asked from the students, better ways to be more direct and more effective with that movement. A lot of people can't do that. They can't articulate why and how they do some things. And that doesn't mean that they're not good at jujitsu or that move, but I do think that it starts to transcend your understanding. I'll also like quickly note that even refereeing sometimes will be able to help your jujitsu as well because you're getting a different perspective. And so when I was wrestling, I'd also refed, and I felt like it helped my wrestling because you get to see a lot of matches that will get there. Plus, one to your point on if you're not consistently working on it and you're not teaching something, I think the common joke is I forgot more than you'll ever know kind of
That
thing.
is
And that's
literally true with me and a lot of other people, I'm sad to say, but yes, go on.
it's going to happen regardless because when you have a career that progresses through decades like you have, you're going to get exposed to so many different things. And what serves you in your game in that moment in time is going to be different than 10 years ago and 20 years ago. Some of it's because you've done Bayesian thinking and you've updated your priors and there's a better technique out there. And sometimes it's just, I'm just working on like this kind of game for right now. And I think that that's perfectly fine. And you should adapt over time. It'd be a travesty if you had the same game as you did 30 years ago or 20 years ago, because then that shows no progress. But mindful teaching helps you because I think there are a lot of people that might have a curriculum or they just teach the thing that they're doing. They're not touching on all the, the pantheon or the entire holistic approach. And that's also an area where some people will have their curriculum and they recycle it, recycle it, recycle it. So they're good at that. They have exposure at that, but they're not incrementally adding or unlocking new moves and stuff like that. And so I think my official reaction to that is yes, I completely agree that teaching will keep you sharp. It'll keep a larger breadth and depth of your skills at hand, and you can apply that in training, and teaching is great. But also competing, or at least being aware of competition, you get to see the meta, what is new coming along down the pipeline that is effective, because a lot of times techniques are effective for a while and they're not as effective because people solve, or at least partially solve, for that technique. And so you need to at least stay up to speed if you want to be competitive, and you want to, and that's not even necessarily competition competitive, but just competitive in a training environment. And so I think that teaching along with curiosity allows you to have consistent improvement and consistent progress on the journey of martial arts. And that translates perfectly over to whether it's business, whether it's even relationships or other aspects of life, where consistently being curious and trying to impart your wisdom and giving back when you can, and it's relevant, you're not mansplaining to someone that knows more about something than you do, is just beneficial to you as a selfish perspective because you get better, but it also is helpful because you're helping other people along the same line. I think that teaching allows you to improve your understanding of the moves at a deeper and different perspective level. I think teaching helps you stay current on what your skills and everything else like that are, like you were mentioning. I think teaching also allows you to gain deeper and deeper empathy, because you get to see what does and doesn't work for other students, and you get to see why it might be the fact that I can do this move in this particular way, but I might need to modify it for someone else. So you get to see other people's perspectives and stuff like that. So I think it's really useful to teach. I think it's one of the greatest gifts that you can give to another human being, is imparting wisdom and skills that you have found success with. I think it's one of the best things about how our martial art is really, I think, proliferating. It's growing and people are passing on, and it's not always good technique. You got to be careful with YouTube and Instagram reels and that kind of stuff, which I see as more like inspiration to explore a position. But it is really nice to be able to talk through a technique, demonstrate a technique, and then see them later on hitting that technique in a competition or in a training, and they get excited about it. That's really fun too.
It was interesting you said curiosity and then teaching. There's two sides to it, right? There is the output side, which is what I normally think of when I think of as teaching, is can you articulate? Can you transmit information to people? And I would say a bad teacher just sort of says, here's what to do, or here's what I do. And they don't really pay attention to, are they saying this in the right way for that audience at that time? And of course, it can be difficult because on the same mat, you might have people who are very tactile learners, very, people who visual learners. I mean, it can be difficult to cater to all the different learning styles, but I think we can definitely agree that if you tried to teach something and the person didn't learn it, that's on you as a teacher, that you have failed as a teacher. You can't blame them necessarily. A good teacher teaches. But also the curiosity side, which is the input side, right? You could just spend the rest of your life being a really, really excellent teacher of everything you know right now and never expanding what you know and not therefore staying current, which might be doing your students a disservice because then you're not teaching them current stuff. And I think that is really important for a teacher too, is to keep that input channel open. So you're continuing to learn even as you're trying to now assimilate that information and teach. I think that there's a tendency, and this is again something I've talked to John Will a lot about, for people to teach something the way they learned it, even if they're not still doing it that way, because they've modified it, but it's almost like the way they do it and the way they talk about it. And the way they talk about it is how they teach it. So I think being a good teacher is in a constant exploration and really testing. Like, what if I say it this way? What if I do it that way? What if I don't talk very much at all? Just a constant period of experimentation. And I think one of the great things about teaching, certainly jujitsu specifically, as opposed to, I don't know, teaching math, is because jujitsu is evolving so quickly. There's constantly new things. Like you wouldn't be walking into a class 5 years from now and expect to be seeing the same things being taught that you're seeing today, which means a constant new need for how do you describe this? And you get this immediate feedback, right? If I teach a move and if 10 minutes later, everybody's doing the move right, that's a very positive feedback to me that, hey, I did good. And if 10 minutes later, everybody's just completely lost the plot, that's frustrating, but it gives me a chance to tweak my teaching to say, oh, think about it this way, right? And so I
Yep.
think that's a very exciting way to keep yourself engaged, as long as you're a teacher who, like you said, is keeping the input open and being willing to experiment. And I would add holding as your litmus test. Are your students learning or are they not learning? Right.
Yep.
I would just add one thing. This speaks to the, people want to go learn from the latest world champion, right? That is not necessarily the best teacher. In fact, usually is not the best teacher. They might be a great practitioner. I make the point about the basketball coach can't beat probably the worst player on his team in a professional basketball, right? But that doesn't mean they're not a great coach. They have all the knowledge. Whether or not they can execute on it at that moment in their life or ever is kind of a different thing.
Absolutely. Really good athletes don't make good coaches, but sometimes they do,
Right.
and
Occasionally they do.
bad athletes. Yeah. It's like just because you have the knowledge, and sometimes it's like they don't have that wide of a knowledge. They might have a really deep knowledge of a specific game that they're able to execute really well at a high level, but that doesn't mean that they can pass even that along to other people. I think teaching is a skill in of itself, just like being an individual contributor, going to management. Those are two different things. You could be a killer individual contributor and fire on all cylinders, and you have to learn brand new skills to be a people manager. They're wildly different. You have to constantly make adjustments. And so just like how being an athlete and being a teacher, there can be overlap, of course, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the case. You brought up a couple really good points, echoing that, one, that being a good teacher is about having a feedback loop of not just inserting new inputs, what's going on in the current meta and what is effective. And especially if I'm having a competition team, how can I proactively think about what are things that could negatively impact my team's game and like try to shore up skills already. That's a really fun like thought experiment. Oh, what are the common counters? And you can build a game around trying to arms race, stay ahead of that. The other thing is what I think you were bringing up is having a constant feedback loop of I'm trying something new. Like I teach my ankle locks a lot, whether it's private seminars or just to different people. The way I teach that is demonstrably different than 3 months ago and way different than a year ago. There's similarities, there's some through threads, but I've also adjusted. My game has expanded and morphed over the years. And how I present the information is a byproduct of not only how my game has morphed and making adjustments, but also from teaching. I get feedback on what does and doesn't resonate well for different people. And I also try to approach, even when I'm teaching a specific part of a blueprint, I will say it one way, demonstrate it another way, and give it an analogy and try to make sure I'm hitting as many people as I can from different angles. So they can be, oh, I get it. Aha, I understand that. And whether it's a seminar or teaching my classes or whatnot, I like to lead with empathy and not the, oh, I feel for that person and that it's difficult, but more I try to put myself in their shoes in the sense that what is the messaging or the demonstration that's going to resonate with them. And that's the ultimate problem that I'm trying to solve for. That I'm trying to, as much as I can, whether it's someone that just is inexperienced and they haven't seen this before, or they have no hand. And so some of the applications of the move might need to be changed, or they're a small person or what do we call it? A high calorie athlete, and it makes some adjustments based off of that. And I think that empathy in that definition allows me to be a lot better teacher. And hopefully they can go away, not only that, hey, I can do this move, but that person spent their psychic energy to try to make sure that it was able for me to take that and run with it. So I think that the inputs are not just, did they do it right or did they not do it right? But it's also, like you said, experimenting. I experiment a lot. My seminars, I often have like Now it's kind of a little bit more set, but the first 45 minutes, if I'm brand new doing it, it'll be pretty similar, small adjustments and stuff. Later on, I'm almost always adding in one or two things where I'm experimenting. I'm working on, and I'm going to show this. I might even say like, hey, this is not quite fully battle tested, but something I'm working on and whatnot. And by going through it and talking through it is helpful. By seeing the challenges that they have and where I'm falling short of being able to articulate it really well is helpful. And then from there, I can codify, okay, hey, this, I'm going to make some changes in the way I do it. And then I'm also going to make some changes in the way I teach it going forward.
We talked about one of the benefits of teaching something like jiu-jitsu as opposed to math is this real-time feedback where you can experiment each day and you get feedback within minutes of delivering your teaching, because you can see,
Yep.
I mean, they've been drilling it for 5 minutes now. Are they getting it wrong or are they getting it right? Whereas if you're a teacher in a more academic setting, I guess you get feedback whenever you get the tests back, or a little bit by, are they asking smart questions, something like that. So jiu-jitsu has that. But I think one thing where jiu-jitsu is much harder as an instructor is you were talking about different people with different needs, someone who's got an injury in their hand or no hand or something like that, or someone who's just big or small. That is pretty much always the case, that anytime you step onto a mat, you may have some outliers, a particularly small person, a particularly big person or something like that, or stiff or flexible. And it can be hard to teach something in a way, because some techniques are legitimately better for certain people in certain body types and require modifications. I tell people, just as a general rule, if you want the best chance of getting the most out of a teacher, try to find a teacher who's similar, at least to your body type, because then whatever else they're teaching, whatever they're doing competitively that works well is probably within your range of something to do. It can be hard to be a really big guy and teach stuff to really small people because you don't have the lived experience, I guess, in that sense. Whereas if you're a very small person, anything you do could work for a very big teacher. So I guess I could modify. The best thing is to find someone about your size or smaller. Because if they're smaller than you and it works, it'll definitely work for you if you're a bigger person. So I just think that there's a challenge there to be a good jiu-jitsu instructor, specifically because you really do have different aptitudes, physical aptitudes that can't possibly change. They are what they are. So you have to adapt to them.
Yeah. And that's the fun part. I like that challenge. It's an honor to be able to try to solve for what does that person need to be able to get to the level. As long as they're engaged and willing to put in the effort and try things out, it's a wonderful thing. And another little quick thing is +1 on what you're saying around, hey, you want to find a teacher that is right for you, especially if it's a brand new thing. Sometimes you don't have that choice because you're going to your gym and whatnot, but especially if you're getting a private lesson or you want to go to a seminar or anything else like that, or you're looking up instructionals, it makes sense to try to align there. And I think that it's really nice to be able to try things out and put it through a filter of like, well, do I need to make adjustments or whatnot? And then whether conscious or unconscious, make a decision. Is this right for me in my game? Is it adjacent enough to what I already have established, or is it way over here and I'm never going to get to it? So why put a lot of effort into it? Especially if it's your regular class, learn it, try to do your best with it. And it might not be right for you right now, but now the seed has been planted. And so maybe now your game is kind of shifted over and up and to the right. Oh, this now I can start incorporating. And so I think that one caution I have is people discard moves too quickly because they're like, no, I don't like that. It's not, I'm never going to berimbolo or whatever it might be. And that might be the case. But I also think that some people try to overfit things into their game that don't make sense. If it's too far from what you already have established and that you are good at, if you're trying to berimbolo, and for all, berimbolo is just a move that is a fairly complex and not easy to hit move, but it can be very effective and it can be really good for certain types of jiu-jitsu games. But if you're just hell-bent on doing that at the exclusion of where you actually will be more effective, I think that both of those extremes are a problem. And so it's like, is this right for me right now? And I think of that as a lot of different ways, not just in jiu-jitsu, but it might be, is this course that I want to take on some new skill right for me right now? Or can I take this course on whatever it is. When I was first learning how to do SQL, which is a database coding language, I was getting just general understanding and trying to get a sense of what it could even do. I'm not going to apply it yet. And then I was like, oh, now I can find challenges that I can overcome with that. And then I started quickly upskilling in that. And then I had real work opportunities to implement it. And then I was roaring ready to go. And now I consider myself a low intermediate at SQL. It's kind of like Excel or other things and Jiu-Jitsu. It's like I know nothing. Now I know a lot. And then you do a little bit longer and you're like, oh, I know nothing again, which is always fun to have. So I think it's good to explore and find what works for you at that time. And that's a good way of thinking about life, I think.
Yeah, I think that's true. Taking it both on and off the mat in terms of being willing to learn new things. And something might just be perfect and you run with it the moment you get it, but something might just be planting the seeds and opening your eyes to something. I think that's sort of the basics of like a liberal arts education, right? Just study a little bit of everything. You're not sure what you're going to go deep into, but let's learn a little philosophy. Let's learn a little math. Let's learn a little astronomy or whatever. And then if something really catches your interest, you dive deeper on that. I think that's true in jiu-jitsu too, especially as you're rising through the belts. You're going to have your own game that you have built that really suits you. And there's a sense of like adding on, latching on different things to your game. You're really good at this one thing. This is related to that. Let's get good at that. It'll easily latch onto my game, which means not only I'll be able to work it a lot, but I'll also get the opportunity to practice it a lot, right? So if you're a very small person and you're just never on top of people, it probably doesn't make sense to be drilling attacks from on top of people because you never get there yet. You will eventually. So tacking on related stuff to what you're already good at, I think is a great way to branch out. Bob Bass in a recent interview called it like he's got a tree and he adds new branches to his tree. And then as you get old, you have to snip off and do some pruning but that's okay. That just means you got to go in a different direction because you just can't do that move. Your elbow doesn't go that way anymore or something like that.
I use the analogy of it's a galaxy and you have like your home planets within the solar system and you want to go where you don't have to travel that far to. And then maybe over time, your home base starts to navigate and meander and you can come back to those because you have a highway, so to speak, but you might be spending a little bit more time in certain areas. And it's much better to add the next planet over or the next star over than something way over in a different galaxy that you might get to learn really, really well. But to your point, if you don't get to it, it's hard to get there. It's not that useful. You could be a black belt in a move, but you never get to that move. It might as well not exist.
I think it's true too. Even if you're a small person, learn a few things from the top. As you are purple belt on, mid-level belt on, it's time for you to have some basic proficiency everywhere. I always learned at multiple schools. The Machados in Los Angeles, when I was training, always had two main schools. And they kind of had different people at those schools. And I trained at both of them always. And then I used to go out and do judo in Santa Barbara, just north of Los Angeles. I would just go do different things. And my whole thing was, you may beat me, but I will have seen it before. And if not, that's why I'm there to learn. Like I want to know everything. Now, I don't get that luxury anymore because I don't spend as much time on the mat. So there certainly are things that are happening that maybe I haven't seen personally before that I could see if I spent time online at YouTube, because now you can see everything the moment that it comes into being. I just don't have the time to do that. So I can't hold that banner anymore. But that was an important part of my training, was at least having some familiarity. Like there's no position you're going to put me in where I don't have at least one option. Doesn't mean it's going to work. Doesn't mean I'm going to get out, but it's like I've been there before. So I think having a very basic map of the galaxy, if you want to call it, or the universe, but then knowing really well your solar system and doing your jaunts out from there, I think makes perfectly good sense.
Yeah, I oversimplify, but I break it down into 13 key positions that you should have minimum one thing that you're at least trying to do, like you're saying, ideally 2 or 3, so you can cycle and you try one and their reaction opens up the next one. It's standing. So when you both first start, it's passing a closed guard, passing an open guard, passing a half guard, and then obviously having those, and then side control, mount and back control, and then the defense. That ends up being 13. These are just different positions in jiu-jitsu where you're at different areas where I'm trying to gain a favorable position. And sometimes if someone has your back, they are holding on to you and they're trying to submit you. Some of it is just your one thing is to get into a less crappy position, and that's perfectly fine. But when I am teaching, especially fundamentals, because when I was at Google, I would teach a class there on a weekly basis, and some people would come in with no martial arts experience at all, or no sports experience at all. And if they would stick around for a little bit of time, that's one of the key aspects is if you ever find yourself in a position where you're like, I have no idea what to do, take a metaphorical screenshot of that. And now you have work for the next couple of weeks or months. Like that should be a red alert. If it's a hole in your game that can be exploited, that's something that you need to address. And it doesn't necessarily need to be super deep knowledge or anything else like that. I often say, like, if you're not comfortable with open guard or whatnot, it's get someone to your closed guard. That's your move from open guard is whatever your sequence is, get them to your closed guard where you can feel a little bit more comfortable, where you can be at a node that you have familiarity and you have a game from.
So you have been extremely successful competitively. And I would add that you got good pretty quick in jiu-jitsu. I mean, just in terms of years, it was impressive. And you're competitively very good, very what we would call a dangerous person on the mat, that you have the ability to submit people and tap them out, which is great. It can be very dangerous really from any position. And I know that you refer to the style that you and your wife, Lauren, who's also a black belt, does is chaos, right? Your team chaos. So talk to me about your thoughts on chaos and what is making you good. Why are you able to win in chaotic situations at times when others don't? Is there some approach you have, some sort of mental model? Why are you excelling in this way?
I go there a lot. I believe Marcelo Garcia mentioned this, and he kind of likes to approach it in a similar heuristic is I try to find hidden harmonies in chaotic situations. And I try to force those chaotic situations as much as possible. Even when I was wrestling in high school, I was never one of those, I got a really good double and I could hold that person down for a long period of time. I wanted to score points. I didn't care if I was down by 10 or up by 10. I wanted to keep scoring points nonstop, especially in freestyle and Greco-Roman, their off season. Like I would have a good amount of people. I don't know if they're fans of mine or not, but there would be crowds at my matches because it wasn't going to be boring. The points were going to be scored. I didn't always win. And sometimes there's a lot of points scored on both ways, but I wanted to create a lot of chaos. And I just felt that from an early age, that's just kind of what I was good. I didn't feel like I was very athletic. I didn't feel like I had a ton of technique. I loved my coaches going up, but they weren't the most technical. And so some of it was about a little bit of self-selection. Maybe it's also like the way my mind works. I just kind of like diving into where things are just all over the place because it feels comfortable in a weird way. And I really spent time being a funky wrestler. And so there's scrambles. And if you spend time, and my mind works really well for this, I will codify some of the things that worked and didn't work without having to like sit down and write it out and drill it 100 times. I just need to expose myself to those situations a significant amount of time and it will start settling in. I'm what I think it's called a few shot learner. Definitely not a one shot learner, but a few shot learner in that I don't need to see something or do something hundreds of times to get it. I just need a couple oftentimes to be able to. I've been learning throughout my white, blue, purple belt, and even now my black belt days, I try to take a third person view to my training and growth where I get out of my way, the body and him figuring out all the things. And I only inject myself in when my natural proclivities with guidance, obviously, aren't sufficient. And so if I'm constantly making the same mistake over and over again, based off of what's going on, like for a while, there's my reactions to when someone had my pant grip and while I'm on my back trying to keep a guard, keep them from getting a pass in a dominant position, and they would have a pant grip and they would go outside, push it across and pass me from there. I was not having very good reactions and it wasn't naturally coming. So I was like, okay, now I got to sit down and really work on what do I need to do for that. As it relates to jiu-jitsu and finding the hidden harmonies in chaotic situations, my mental models is to go there and to find what works there and to continue to go there and put people in spots where they're not comfortable. They're not used to it. I think even you mentioned earlier, I might get beat, but it's not that I haven't seen it. So oftentimes I will have things where people are like, what was that? Like, where did that come from? And I find great pleasure in that. It is a way of approaching in a somewhat methodical way. There are aspects where I will purposely enter into that, but I also will be very opportunistic. Now, as far as like finding the submissions, and because I do feel like I can submit almost anyone, that doesn't mean I'm going to be a favorite or I'm going to win often, but I have the ability to be, like you said, dangerous as long as it's already in the realm of what I do well. A lot of it also is the same thing as I actively hunt submissions and I try to figure out why or why not that they worked or did not work. And I'm also not afraid to give up positions and quote unquote lose if I don't submit someone, because like, who cares? Especially in training, like I didn't get it. But if you don't ever go for it, if you're not willing to push the envelope a little bit, you're not going to be able to continue to progress. You're not going to be able to access the currently unattainable if you don't try to push that envelope a lot. And I will also acknowledge that there's probably something about my body type or the way my mind works that it kind of just clicks really well because I do have a very good instinct for it. And I like to think that I've spent time learning how I learned and getting out of my own way. But some of it probably also is my frame rate and my processing power of my brain is very high. And that certainly is very helpful in those chaotic situations. I can process things faster than other people generally.
Yeah, well, look, everybody has their particular talents. Mine, of course, is devastating good looks, but we have our talents and we build on them. And I've no doubt that you have certain brain wiring things that just work towards what you've developed in terms of, like you say, quick frame rate processing, things like that. You were talking about your 13 basic anchor positions or something like that. And when you're in chaos, you're sort of flowing between things. It reminds me a little bit of playing music. You can learn chords, and those are anchor positions. And then you can play jazz and you can move around. And if you understand the basic rules of what key you're in and what might sound good and what might not sound good, you can start to play and you can flow and you can be okay more in something that's a little bit more like jazz, right? A little bit more chaotic. It's interesting to me to think in terms of positions. Positions can be limiting, right? You can say, well, this is the mount and this is not the mount. And that's a better understanding than someone who doesn't even have a word for it. Again, my buddy John Will, who I mentioned, says definition of an expert is someone who has a finer slicing of the understanding, right? I look at a car and I see a car with an engine and a windshield. And a mechanic looks at it and says, no, that's a whatever CC engine. And they can tell you all the details about it. It's almost like I would say, oh, there's the mount, which is when you're sitting on top of someone. But there's a high mount, and there's a low mount, and there's an S mount, and there's 50 different kinds of mounts if you want to start paying attention to the detail of that. And then you're going to become a mount expert if you do that. So I think that there's some interplay with starting with a fixed position and then starting to understand variations and identify them. That was one of the cool things about Eddie Bravo. Part of identifying them for we as humans is sometimes naming them. Literally, if you can name it, you're certainly now seeing it as a distinct thing, right? And that probably deepens your understanding of, oh, wait, if that's a thing, like when I started in jiu-jitsu, I don't recall anyone using the term half guard. There was the guard. And then sometimes as they were passing the guard, you snagged a leg. And we had moves from there, but it was a few years before I heard anyone call it half guard. But once they did start calling it half guard, suddenly you started learning, oh, half guard passes and half guard. So once the position is identified and named, then people start to think about it and process it more. And you can come from that very fixed area, or you can come from this completely natural kinesthetic learning area where I don't name any of it. It's just called movement in jiu-jitsu and it's all 360. And I think there's some way to meet in the middle or something like that. For me, I like to have the understanding and then slice it and slice it and slice it. I remember it was a big revelation for me when, I don't know who it was first mentioned it, that being in the closed guard is like being in an upside down mount, right? And it is, if you think about it. And then if we understand, oh, well, when I'm on the mount, again, I'm going BJJ for our non-BJJ listeners, but if I'm on the mount and I want to start to set up an arm bar, I want to kind of crowd your arm and move my hip in and kind of trap my arm pressing across. So if I think about an upside down mount, I guess I want to lift my hip and press it into your arm. And so seeing the relationship between positions to me can help speed your learning of that position to understand. Or you also mentioned, just in terms of learning, I can say, do this. And a natural tendency for humans when they learn is to relate something to something that we know, right? So if I say there's something that's tall and it's green, you might say, well, looks like a tree. And that allows you to put it in a box, which is both limiting, but it also gives you a frame of reference, and it helps in teaching, right? So if you can say, here's a move in jiu-jitsu, and it's just like this move, except it's upside down. Now, suddenly, if they know that other move, I think they're going to learn that better because they can connect it up to some frame of reference. So I feel like I come from the learn the move, learn the name, slice it into more things, connect it on frames of references, because I don't think I ever really was the just put me out there and I'm going to figure out the right thing. Although in my life, I've definitely had that experience where I just had never practiced something before and it just instincts took over and took it right. And probably there's some merging of the two, of being willing to jump into the deep end and figure it out on the fly, and being willing to also know very, very specifically, this is this, now this is this 0.5, now this is this 0.75, and to build a deep, complex understanding that way.
I think that you're right. And what's funny is the way I teach is not the way I learn, but the way that I approach teaching, I try to incorporate both of those. I'll give a very clear example of like just jumping into the deep end and figuring things out. The third time I ever ice skated, I played a hockey game. And that's just my style. I just jump in and figure things out, and it speeds up the acquisition of skill in most domains very quickly for me. But I do think that there's some level of like, let people figure positions out. And so one of the ways that I incorporate this into a seminar teaching or whatnot is I will show a position with a few guideposts, and then I go and let them explore a little bit, see where they're having the most difficulty across the room, and come back and go back through it and add the different guideposts along the way that will help speed it along. I think that that's one thing that you can use for constraining the application of let your body figure things out. And I think that that's something that people need to respect, is a lot of people will need to build up that foundation before they can explore and before they can go around. And I think that it's great. And one thing that I want to note is if you can name it, you can start to develop it. That's beautiful. And I think that it constrains things in some ways, but as long as you are willing to open your mind, like say in the mount position, which can have many different variations and iterations, there's clearly a not mount, and there's clearly a mount according to rule set and whatnot that it'll give you points. And it changes from a binary to a lot more of a gradient like you're talking about. And there's value in having a frame of reference, but being able to manage and navigate around it and not constrain yourself. I'm in half guard or I'm an accountant, but that doesn't mean that you only do 3 or 4 core tasks. You might jump in and do some of the marketing tasks and some of the finance tasks and that kind of stuff. Just because you have a frame of reference or a starting point doesn't mean that's the only domain that you can be in.
You got to make it not be limiting. In the case of Eddie Bravo, who I mentioned, the first things he did was rubber guard, like just this really high way of closing his legs around people. And he started naming these techniques and the electric chair and mission control. And it wasn't that they were things that I hadn't seen, but as soon as he started giving them these cool names, then people started to think deeply about them and then realize, oh, there's 16 versions of this and you can do all these things. And mission control must be this thing that you go to where you're safe and you can start launching these things. So I do agree with you. The naming is good. The understanding in depth is good, with the caveat that you can't have it become limiting. It's got to remain something open, and it gives you a basis somewhere to go from. Just for our jiu-jitsu listeners, to give a quick audio taste without demonstrating, like we talk about the mount, you could be sitting low on the person's hips and sitting up in the air. You could be sitting low on the person's hips and be very down. You could have them in one underhook. You could have them in two underhooks. You could have them in a crossface. You could be sitting midway. You could be sitting high up underneath their armpits. Your knees could be underneath their armpits. Your feet could be on their belly. Doesn't have to be on the ground. Your feet could be low and crossed underneath their butt. You could be shifted off to one side. Then there's S-mount. Like, we could name 100 different variations of this thing that looks like it's just one position. But if you've never thought about that, you're probably not getting the most out of that position because you haven't opened up your mind to understand how many variations there could be. And once you start understanding it, whether you name each one or not, you're going to start to see that position in a whole new light.
And why you might do each of those different iterations, whether you're preventing them from escaping them out or you're attacking a specific thing or whatever it is, having that nuance or that gradient, and then understanding even better, understanding why you might do each of those, then you're starting to transcend into mastery.
So moving just a little bit, I want to be respectful of your time, but moving a little bit off of jiu-jitsu, you have this successful career at Google, which you have recently chose to move off into some other endeavors, which we can talk about if you want. But have you had any challenges that you've had to overcome or pivotal moments that you look back on that you can say, wow, this was really important, or anything? I'm looking for things that maybe people might be able to relate to that can help them.
I think everyone encounters challenges to overcome, and I think all challenges are usually pretty relative. I've overcome quite a bit. I'll glom on to being an athlete and having a full-time, very demanding job. I was in FP&A for finance for quite a few years, and then I transitioned to learning and development. While at Google, there's so much to learn. It feels like you're drinking from a fire hydrant the whole time, and there's always this almost oppressive level of perform, and get better and do more, which I think is great on a lot of levels, but sometimes it's a little bit much. And trying to navigate having a hobby as demanding as jiu-jitsu while having a very demanding job and a family and trying to have a little bit of a life is very difficult to try to figure out. And a bunch of dogs. I have three husky mixes and a cat. Can't forget about the cat. It's countless amount of, I can't train because of this, or I'm too tired or whatnot, but I still will compete a lot and I still would go through it. And a lot of it was, I think, listening to your recent podcast on competition, you bring up one of the points of competing or training when you want to, you're in great spirits and everything else. Like, that's easy. That's the easy parts. Doing it even when you don't want to is the hard part. And so some of the obstacles that I think, even outside of some of the other considerations of why people will or will not compete, life is going to get in your way. And a lot of it's about answering, like, why are you doing the things that you're doing? And are you going to place votes in the type of person that you want to be? And now, I don't profess that being a good jiu-jitsu competitor necessarily is the best thing in the world to do, and that's all personal and stuff like that, but it's something that I wanted to invest time and effort into. And so running through and navigating a very demanding job while competing on a regular basis is and was very, very difficult in a lot of ways, but I made it happen. And I also have, not as super severe, but I do have an autoimmune disease that has definitely added to the challenge of not only training, but also competing on a lot of levels. I have competed with, I'll call it a flare up, many times, with cluster headaches, with feeling like crap a lot. And I don't, sometimes probably should, but I don't let that hold me back from being able to compete. And a lot of it's the same thing, is I want to continue to do hard things and show up even when I don't really want to. and push through that. Some of the pivotal moments, I think, along the lines of like my autoimmune disease was finally getting diagnosed with it. In college, I got C. diff, which is a bacterial growth infection. I almost died. And from kind of then on, I don't know if that was the start of it or anything else like that. I had stomach issues for forever after that, and a couple really bad experiences with doctors where they're like dismissive or just kind of like, oh, it's in your head. Oh, you got IBS. Just like, don't eat certain foods or whatever. And you're like, well, which certain foods? Like, how do I know which certain foods to avoid? And so I got really disenfranchised from the medical establishment, and I felt like it wasn't serving me, and it was wildly expensive and all these other things. And so for many, many years, I just dealt with symptoms and just gutted it through and grinned and bore my teeth and just try to make the best of it. And no one wants to hear a grown man complain is a common saying that I would hear. And finally taking it into my own hands and treating it like a part-time job of getting my health in check, getting diagnosed with that, dealing with the injuries and the bumps and bruises with jiu-jitsu, but also just all these other things, even though it was a lot of hours and a lot of time and commitment, even like getting my mental health in check has been probably the most impactful thing that I've done for myself in my overall well-being, but also in my ability to perform at my sport and my jiu-jitsu, but also in my job in being at Google, but now on my own, many different coals in the fire kind of thing. And so I think that while it does suck, it does really benefit you long-term to make sure that you're putting the right amount of effort into taking care of yourself and taking ownership of that and still following along with what you might want to do.
You know, it's interesting because people see you winning and you're strong and you're seemingly in great shape. And people wouldn't assume, oh, you nearly died or you've had health issues or whatever. And I've learned that, yeah, everybody's got issues. And I mean, sometimes they're different, sometimes they're more serious, but I was super healthy, never had any problem, and then had some weird anxiety thing that came out of absolutely nowhere that stumped the doctors, and it really had me out. And the body is weirdly strong, weirdly fragile. It just depends. And you make a really good point about just the problems with our medical system. That's a whole nother podcast that I will have with a doctor friend of mine. I'm waiting for when he has time, who's just great on that and is writing a whole book about how to navigate the system. But that is just a messed up system, our system of medical care. And you really do absolutely need an advocate. And if you're able, that advocate has to be you, or at least somebody to help navigate, to push through. That's just tough. But I know that you have now, I think, a team that supports you for different things and for training and stuff. And you seem to have taken it into your own hands to pull together a good team. And you have some people you can rely on for support, which is good. I think the results that you've gotten in competition, especially given it's not your full-time gig, that you, like you say, you had a full-time stressful job, you got married, you know, in a relationship, you have all these kinds of things going on, makes it even more impressive. It's easier to be good at jiu-jitsu when you're like my friends in Brazil were, like, that's all you do is surf and do jiu-jitsu because you come from a wealthy family and that's it. You just surf and do jiu-jitsu. It's hard when you, as you say, have a life. I've been in that situation too, or have other passions as well. But your success in competition is super admirable. And also, I know that you are now going into some business ventures. I don't know if you want to share anything on that. We can also have links on that. And we can always talk again because we could talk forever. But before I let you talk about business ventures, since you mentioned competition, you could do a 20-part series on competition and doing something hard. It really comes from you. You mentioned my podcast on competition, which if you're all interested in martial arts competition, friends, you should listen to that. The one thing I didn't say, though, that I missed when I heard it back, and it was Chrissa, who is a BJJ instructor at a Scrap Pack. I have an interview with her where she is saying people shouldn't wait, like people, especially white belts and blue belts, don't feel ready to compete. They don't feel good. And that's one reason why people don't compete. And I forgot to mention that, but you just touched on that again too. I never remember a competition I went into where I felt like I am in perfect shape. Everything has been great. I didn't have some trip before it. I'm not sick. I got a great night's sleep last night. Like, that just doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. And so my little push for people to compete is don't wait until the right time. The right time is now. Now is always the right time, unless you're sick or injured. That's my
Yep,
2 cents.
absolutely. I think that there are different versions of fear, and the fear manifests in different ways. Now, of course, you don't want to just go willy-nilly into competitions and whatnot. You want to have like a reason to do it and all these other things. But oftentimes, I've heard that thousands of times, whether it's a fresh white belt or, oh, I really want to compete. I really want to compete. I'm like, well, there's these 3 tournaments in the next 6 months. Which one do you want to do? Like, give yourself a little bit of time, get yourself focused and stuff like that. But it's hard for a lot of people to put themselves out there to compete because it is scary. It is nerve-wracking and everything else like that. And I think that you're 100% right. There's no optimal time. There's just a good enough time. And if you need a couple months, you need a couple months, put it on the calendar, find one that works for you and make it work.
And I always had the added, I always say my real reason, certainly through most of my life for going into competition, was to get the adrenaline and a little bit of fear that you just don't get in normal training, because my goal in martial arts is to be able to fight. That's always my baseline goal of why I'm in it. And part of that was the same thing. Like, well, you don't get to choose when someone's going to attack you. You don't get to choose when someone's going to attack your family. So you don't feel up for a competition. Well, sorry. I mean, like I say, if you're not injured, if you're not sick, that's not really an excuse not to go in. And there's also people assume that, oh, yeah, but the other person's in great shape. Like, no, the other person has their problems too, and you just get out there and do it. But getting to your current stuff, what are you up to these days? Because you're very smart. I know you're going to be successful at whatever it is, but tell me what you're up to.
So I am putting various different coals in different fires. My main venture is with a really good friend of mine who was at Google as well. And we're working on a data analytics company for mixed martial arts, specifically UFC, with the end state being sports betting advice, who we think you're going to win, what odds are good, and what percentage of your bankroll you should be betting on. It's funny, when you're working on entrepreneur efforts, it's mostly about solving a lot of problems that you would have never foreseen. And it's about playing whack-a-mole with all the things that come up. We're hopeful that we're pre-revenue right now. Hopefully that changes very soon. We're in a good space and we have a pretty good following on YouTube, and we're plugging away. And even if it doesn't go anywhere, one thing that I really like is that it has forced me to learn a lot and do solving all those problems, but also just in the domain of having a video production component of it and just navigating the data architecture and the automation and utilization of AI and many different other components has been just a breath of fresh air to work on something different and new. And so whether this takes off and goes into the trajectory that we would like to see, or it fizzles out, it's really the amount of things I've learned have been integral in there. And that's called MMA Fight Advisor. We're on YouTube and we'll have a Discord channel soon enough. And
we'll have links in the show notes, and those will be updated. If new things come out, we'll go back and keep them updated.
Sounds great. And it's meant to be informative analytics. And then the paid subscriber version will be more of the who to bet on, how much, and so on. I'm also working on Team Chaos Jiu-Jitsu, which apropos to the Jiu-Jitsu component of this is my wife and I, who's also a black belt. She's a pretty experienced competitor as well. She teaches kids class at Black Sheep, and she's a great teacher. We have a YouTube channel, a Patreon, and a podcast, which we not as high production as this one and less polished, but we just kind of ramble on about different topics, especially as master level competitors, just navigating the whole world of having a kiddo and life and work and just pontificating on the various different topics that come on. We source a lot of the questions from listeners or friends of ours, which is a lot of fun. I'll put up tech videos, whether it's recordings from seminars, or I'll film different clips or competition highlights. And so does my wife, Lauren. So it's really fun to explore that whole area. And I recently, just before the end of this year, filmed an instructional for BJJ Fanatics. And so I'm really excited about that. It's been just such an honor and a pleasure to go down that route and like really fleshing out my blueprint from the many different seminars that I've taught and private lessons on my whole blueprint around short X ankle lock. And that experience in itself was really long and arduous, but also really fun and informative.
I know you have left some time in your schedule for teaching privates in the Bay Area where you live. And also, I know you're doing seminars, including a cool camp.
Yeah, I teach private lessons, group lessons. So whether it's 2, 4, 6, 8 group of people, I do private seminars as well. A couple different gyms are having me come every few months to their area. And one pretty close to my dad, he's like, hey, I think your dad misses you. And which is nice because then I can have repetition of content. But I also do more public open seminars. I do them as it fits into my schedule and it works for whomever. And I generally end up doing leg locks, ankle locks type stuff because that's what people like. But I also let people choose too. Like if you want specific things, I'm really, really open. I'm pretty laid back and I want it to be helpful for people. I have a couple private clients that seem very happy with the progress. And like I was mentioning earlier, where I lead with empathy, not your emotions around it, but what is going to be the most helpful for the person that I'm trying to work with or the group that I'm trying to work with. And I really, really enjoy teaching. It's one of the most enjoyable things to me, especially in the seminar format. For some reason, I just really love that area of teaching. But on down to private lessons is great. And I think that there's a lot of value to be had when the people there are engaged and want to learn. There's nothing better than having an engaged and motivated student base.
Well, I can give my unqualified recommendations to anybody. I've seen you teach. We've taught some privates together, and I think you are a phenomenal instructor. You are that rare combination of a great instructor and a great competitor. And you're known for your footlocks because they're so devastating and they're so elite. But we wrestle all the time, and you play with me as a baby, and you never touch my feet. You don't even look at my feet. So you have a lot to offer, but of course you're famous because that's what people see in the competitions with you subbing people in seconds and things like that. And that's a great thing to learn from you as well. But you are a really great instructor. And yeah, I just super high recommendation. Anybody who can get spend time with you. I'm very, very happy that I get as much time with you as I can, and that we're frequently at the same competitions. It always really helps me if you're in my corner because I'm used to nobody being in my corner. But I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk. And I'll be seeing you, I'm sure, within some amount of hours on the mat.
Thank you so much. One, for the kind words, but also your time.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed my discussion with David Mitchell. Check out the show notes for links to find David, his Team Chaos Jiu-Jitsu YouTube channel, and his instructionals on BJJ Fanatics. And please leave me comments and let me know what you like or don't like about the Ageless Warrior Lab. I'm doing this for you, and it's good to hear your thoughts. And if you like the show, thanks for clicking like and sharing. I'll be back next week with more lessons from the lab. And until then, keep developing your strengths, your wisdom, and go out and do good in the world.